It's going to continue to rise because we have China coming online, China who will use millions and millions of tons of coal to serve their own energy needs, and so coal prices will continue to increase. And of course, we all know that Nova Scotia Power uses coal, burning fossil fuels. Coal is going to increase year after year, so Nova Scotia Power consistently will come back to this House looking for that rate increase. Nova Scotia Power needs to invest more and more money each year, investing in plant upgrades. And certainly it's encouraging that Nova Scotia Power has put in well over $45 million in the Trenton plant to see new technologies to reduce fly ash and other emissions. But each year, they're going to have to consistently look at upgrading other facilities, crumbling facilities that need upgrades. They're going to be coming back to recoup some of those costs. And so they will be looking for further rate increases to help with those costs. Nova Scotia Power will consistently come back to this table, will come back to URB looking for increased rate costs because they need to meet emission targets. They need to meet emission targets set out by our now Made in Canada strategy around the reduction of air emissions. We know that rate increases are going to be here facing us yearly. This government had an opportunity to really put forward strong legislation speaking to the need for a comprehensive energy strategy. This province seriously lacks a comprehensive energy strategy and a comprehensive renewable energy strategy. Nova Scotia is blessed with an abundance of rich, clean, natural resources. Our wind, our solar, and our tidal energies combined offer a resource that this government is clearly not recognizing. This government had an opportunity through this piece of legislation to really keep on the heels of Nova Scotia Power. We all know that here in this province, Nova Scotia Power is one of the largest polluters in this province, pumping out daily toxic greenhouse emissions. We have rising asthma cases in this province. And we only need to recognize that climate change is one of the biggest issues facing not only this province, but facing our country and facing all of our global communities. Another reason that this government missed an opportunity is because they failed to recognize that we really need to be more aggressive in moving forward with our energy needs, looking at clearly investing in renewable energy projects across this province. They need to be holding Nova Scotia Power accountable for not moving forward in aggressively harnessing the wind, capturing the tidal power, really investing in solar energy. Nova Scotia Power could have been encouraged through this piece of legislation to invest heavily in the transmission infrastructure across this province. Nova Scotia Power is responsible for 5,200 kilometers of transmission lines across this province. 345 kV lines run from Sydney, Truro, and Halifax. The rest of the province, however, is served by 69, 138, and 230 kV lines across this province, lines that are not adequately equipped to handle a budding wind industry. This government missed that opportunity to seriously hold Nova Scotia Power accountable and say, you need to be investing in those transmission infrastructure lines across this province. If we're really serious about creating a sustainable, renewable energy industry across this province, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for that industry. This government needs to act responsibly in ensuring that that infrastructure exists. And this was an opportunity. This piece of legislation was an opportunity for the government to talk about that. Nova Scotia Power needs to be challenged with healthy, clean competition. And we're afraid. We're afraid to talk about competition in this province. Why? Why are we afraid to stand up to Nova Scotia Power and say, you know what? We really need to look at having good, clean, healthy competition in this province. There are many independent power producers that are waiting to step up to the challenge. They're waiting. They have investments in place. They have the expertise, and they've been working diligently over the last several years to ensure that they are ready to move forward. And this government is stalling. This government has been stalling for the last several years. There are many leaders from the renewable energy industry and other partners that put forward to government a strategy, a plan. They put forward that strategy and a plan to see renewable energy move forward in this province. They put forward to government 89 recommendations in the form of a report. It was a clear, concise report how this government could have moved forward in this province with renewable energy. The Electricity Market Governance Committee had asked this government to commit to moving those recommendations forward. There were 89 of them. This government committed and made a promise to adopt all of those 89 recommendations. In particular, Recommendation 51, which would allow independent power producers to sell their energy to consumers. What did the government do? They made a promise, they made a commitment, and they failed to act. When will this government commit to the promises that they've made, that they made to the renewable energy industry in this province? I'm not suggesting that this government consider full deregulation of the market, but this government has access to all of the best expertise. The expertise is out there. People in the industry that have the knowledge to take the best of the renewable energies examples across countries such as Denmark and Sweden, who are true leaders. We have experts in this province that can learn from the mistakes made with deregulations in California. We need to look at Ontario, a province who is moving aggressively forward in offering IPPs standard offered contracts. The expertise is there. We just need the will to move forward. This government and this minister missed a tremendous opportunity when they put forward this bill. Consumers are looking for a choice in power providers. Consumers are becoming more educated. Our young people are most educated in the need for renewable energy choices in this province. We are doing a disservice to our children and our grandchildren not to act now, not to hold Nova Scotia Power accountable, not just for rate increases yearly, but to hold them accountable to truly move forward, to open up the market, to allow true competition. Consumers know that if they have a choice, renewable energy in the long run will actually offer a more stable price in power, in green power, than Nova Scotia Power can ever hope to provide with the rising coal prices, with the delivery of coal from Venezuela, with the delivery of coal in other countries. Nova Scotia Power has a very bad track record purchasing coal from countries who are not practicing good labor standards for their workforces, countries that really keep under their thumb all of the men and women who work in that coal industry. There are some true leaders in this province, businesses and municipalities who are ready for renewable energy. In Queens, for example, I sat for 4 years in the Planning Advisory Committee in Queens, and one aggressive step we made, that was ensuring that Queens was ready. Queens is ready to have wind energy come to that municipality. We made sure in our planning advisory process that we had clear definitions for renewable wind energy development, clear definitions for what bylaws and zoning requirements were needed for wind power development. Queens also showed true leadership when they invested, along with the South Shore Energy Office, when they invested in the Southwest Wind Study, a study that mapped out the South Shore, showing the geography for the best wind regimes on the South Shore. That's true leadership. We are moving forward, but we need to have the other side of the equation, the other leadership equation that this government isn't demonstrating. It isn't demonstrating that leadership in this piece of legislation. We have true leaders in our community, individuals who are choosing to live off the grid. In Queens, a young couple, a young doctor and his wife, are building a new home in one of my communities in Queens, and they're choosing to live off the grid. They're investing in their own wind turbine. They're taking responsibility for their own energy needs. This is a young doctor and his wife who are rising to the challenge. They recognize we have a serious energy problem in this province. Our electricity transmission lines are not reliable, our energy system is not working for consumers, and these are true leaders in our community. I'll give you another example of true leadership in our communities. Just last week, my sister and my brother-in-law invested in their own wind turbine. They're choosing to live off the grid. They're choosing to live off the grid. Why? Because they are tired of investing in Nova Scotia Power year after year, month after month, and getting no returns. No returns. Our communities deserve to be part of the solution. We have many people in our communities showing that true leadership. Communities deserve to have part of the ownership of the natural resources. They deserve to have part of the ownership of the wind and the tidal resources across this province, because they certainly don't have any ownership unless they're a big shareholder in Nova Scotia Power. I was really hoping that this bill would have talked about some of those issues. And while, again, it does offer some protection to some of our consumers in terms of perhaps some comfort in knowing that Nova Scotia Power won't be going back to the table in 8 months' time or 10 months' time, but in 12 months' time. But it offers little comfort because consumers will know that year after year after year, Nova Scotia Power will have the ability to go back to the table and ask again for yet another rate increase. It will offer little comfort year after year for those consumers who are energy-poor consumers when their dollars don't go up month after month, year after year, but they're still faced with a growing energy bill, a growing light bill, year after year. And what about industry? In Queens, most of you know that Bowater Mersey, the manufacturing plant for pulp and paper, they're faced with some serious energy concerns. Serious energy concerns, much like Stora. In fact, Bowater was at the table along with Stora when they were sitting around the URB table and looking for a rate decrease. It's becoming increasingly difficult for our pulp and paper industry to do business in this province. And yes, I know there are other factors around the pulp and paper industries and the challenges they face. Supply management is a challenge. The up-and-coming markets in China are changing pulp and paper needs. I know the industry is changing, but one thing they don't need is faced with constantly increasing costs in their energy rates. They won't be able to survive in this province. Perhaps the government needs to show true leadership and suggest to Nova Scotia Power that perhaps they need to look at competition. Maybe we need to be encouraging some of our bigger industries to start producing power inside the fence. Just imagine what it would look like. A wind turbine, or 2 or 3, sitting in a community, generating power not only for industry, but also generating power for local businesses, small businesses, for schools, for institutions, for residents. Sustainable development, sustainable energy, what a concept. But we're not showing true leadership. As we move forward in the next coming years, our energy issues will continue to grow, and we will be faced with these same sorts of questions and concerns. Why are we not moving forward? We have known for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years that we would be faced with these concerns in this province. We have been held hostage and captive with Nova Scotia Power, and we refuse to stand up and go toe-to-toe and say enough is enough. We refuse to stand up and say we know better now. We refuse to acknowledge all of the expertise out there. We refuse to seriously sit at the table and take recommendations seriously to move them forward. This government has demonstrated its inability to act when given a chance. I've looked at the energy strategies. I've read through the renewable energy strategies, and what do I see? Nothing that is clearly comprehensive, nothing that is moving us forward. And yes,
Order,
I know
please.
Nova Scotia.
Order,
yes.
please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Energy on a point of order.
No, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the member if she would take a question.
Will the member for Queens take a question?
No.
Member for Queens.
I would rather not.
The answer is no, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Queens has the floor.
Thank you. If I can continue. I do acknowledge that Nova Scotia Power has been moving forward in little short steps, moving forward with, there are some turbines out there, absolutely, no question. But we need to be more aggressive. 28 is not a lot. In the last several years, 28, and I can tell you probably all of the megawatts of all of those turbines, and I can tell you a lot of them are test towers. We're still testing the wind here in Nova Scotia, which I hope doesn't stop blowing. Contrary to, popular belief, I don't think the wind does stop blowing. Again, this bill could have had so much more. And I'm really disappointed that the Minister of Environment who put this bill forward had such an opportunity to address not only our energy issues here in the province, but our environmental issues. Everything revolves around our environment, whether we're talking energy, whether we're talking health issues, whether we're talking educational issues, whether we're talking economic development. What about economic development in this piece of legislation? This minister missed a lot of opportunities here, a lot. And although I'm sure that this piece of legislation will pass, because I totally agree it's time to put the brakes on Nova Scotia Power requesting yet again another rate increase, I agree with that. But we need to be more aggressive. We need to talk about what's happening now in our province. We need to leave a legacy. We need to stand up to Nova Scotia Power and really say enough is enough. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward to the government at some point in time adding an amendment to this piece of legislation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to stand here today and talk in regards to Bill 20, which deals with the Public Utilities Act and deals with Nova Scotia Power. It was quite interesting to stand here and listen to the debate of my honourable member from Queens, and certainly she's very knowledgeable in the energy sector, and I think we can all learn from one another here by listening. Mr. Speaker, Bill 20 basically does one thing. It prevents Nova Scotia Power from being granted more than one general rate increase in any 12-month period. Now, on face value, when you first glance at that, you think, oh, this is a good thing, especially for people that have just gone through any kind of an increase, which is all of us. And in fact, the last one was the 8.9% increase. However, Mr. Speaker, we all know that indeed government's job here is to provide a leading role in the objectives that the people in this province face. And one of the big issues that people in this province face right now, Mr. Speaker, is the rising cost of energy. Instead of the government leading the way for Nova Scotia Power to go down the road of renewable energy, this is the kind of bill we see here today. Little more than 2 sentences. It's government's job to hold Nova Scotia Power accountable, to hold them accountable on the amount of emissions that they release into the air. We all know that Nova Scotia Power is one of the biggest polluters in Canada. In fact, when I was environment critic, the top 10 most polluted places in Canada were here in Nova Scotia. That's not something, you know, we can ever be proud of. But we can't forget that those facts are a reality. And instead of just staying at a standstill, which is basically, you know, what we're doing, we should be looking at proactive ways that are going to generate economic development for our young people in Nova Scotia, because we know that we have a huge problem here with out-migration, and we should be looking at ways in which we can use our energy problem to come up with solutions for us and for the next generation. It's the government's job to hold Nova Scotia Power accountable to provide this renewable energy that we need. It's the government's job to be the voice of the people in Nova Scotia that don't have a voice as far as their electricity bills are generated, Mr. Speaker. We all know that Nova Scotia Power is in business to make a profit. Unfortunately, the commodity that they're making a profit on is a necessity of life for the people that live in Nova Scotia. We're not living in Florida, we're living in Nova Scotia. We have already seen in the last few days, it's snowing, it's cold out, people are turning on, they've had their heat on. If you talk to seniors now that are starting to call the constituency offices, they're going to be telling you that, you know, they can't put on another layer of clothing, Mr. Speaker. These are real people with real issues, and it's a shame that the government of Nova Scotia has not taken on a more proactive leadership role in coming forward with a bill which would address some of the issues that people in Nova Scotia are facing. Nova Scotia Power, if everybody recalls, I think sometime this summer, sent out, along with your power bill, a little piece of paper, glossy, that gave you some little tips on how to save on your energy consumption. And one of them was to hang out your clothes. I think that's one of the ones I recall. Now, people, you know, a lot of people don't have, number one, a clothesline. Another thing that the government and Nova Scotia Power will talk about is, you know, upgrade your insulation. A lot of seniors in Nova Scotia, believe it or not, a lot of homes in Nova Scotia are still insulated with seaweed. Some homes have no insulation at all. Seniors are living in homes in Nova Scotia that they're not living in a comfortable environment. They've indeed closed off portions of their home, sometimes only rooms, sometimes the whole upstairs or the downstairs or the recreational areas, you know, and such, Mr. Speaker. This is what it's come down to in Nova Scotia. And I'm not just talking about a comfort level here as far as being comfortable in your home and enjoying your home. I'm talking about people in Nova Scotia making hard decisions every day on whether or not they are going to pay their power bill, pay their rent, put food on the table, buy the sneakers for their kids to go to school with, give their children the necessities that they need. These are the kinds of issues that people are facing in Nova Scotia because our power rates keep going up and up and up. And this bill may address the issue of, well, they're only going to go up once a year, but it's not going to stop the amount that they're going to go up, even if they went up once a year. Maybe it's going to be double the amount that they went up if they had it went up twice. Who knows? It's not addressing the issue that if we continue along the road we're following now, which is not the road to renewable sources of energy, this is only going to get worse. And I don't know where really it's going to end, Mr. Speaker. Last year in my office, well, when we had the summer budget here, after we found out that the Keep the Heat program was going to be canceled, people were astonished. And even now, some people don't understand that Keep the Heat program is no longer in existence. That was a good little program. And indeed, some people, even though the HST has come off the HST has come off right now, the Keep the Heat program, actually, some people would have come out further ahead with that because of the amount of energy that they actually use, Mr. Speaker. Some people are using a very small amount of energy because they simply cannot afford to use more. Last year, I had people in my constituency that got the Keep the Heat program rebate. They applied for it. They also ended up going to various churches in my community and outside the community to try and get help. They went to the Salvation Army because the Salvation Army last winter did have some money that Nova Scotia Power provided for them. And I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, and maybe I'll find out later, I don't think people know if Nova Scotia Power, it was in the paper the other day, Salvation Army, I believe, were saying that they didn't know if Nova Scotia Power was going to provide them with that pot of money again this year. But I've got people in my constituency that now have moved out of the constituency, that have been living in a duplex, cannot afford the heat any longer, had to move out of the constituency into an apartment because the apartment's rent included the heat. And they simply could not, they felt downtrodden, they felt that they could not afford to pay the heat anymore. It's not nice to have to phone churches and ask for money, and I'm very thankful to the churches in my community and in other communities that have helped people out when they've been, had their backs against the wall. What does this do to people when they have to go, when they have to phone their MLA and ask for help and tell the MLA that they can't pay their heat, that they've been to the food bank already that month? You can only go to food banks once a month, Mr. Speaker. And what does that do to people's self-esteem? What does it do to the children that live in the home? These are the questions that, you know, are facing some of our lowest income earners in Nova Scotia. So, you know, we're talking about electricity, but electricity is a necessity of life. And, you know, unless you own a share in Nova Scotia Power, you really don't have a say in what Nova Scotia Power is going to do. The only say that people in Nova Scotia have with Nova Scotia Power is through this facility that we're standing in here today, Mr. Speaker. We're the voice, specifically the government and the official opposition, trying to hold them accountable. The government there is the voice of is supposed to be the voice of the people. They're supposed to be protecting the people of Nova Scotia, making sure that Nova Scotia Power does everything that they can possibly do to bring down the cost of electricity in this province. Mr. Speaker, we've heard one of the ministers talk about, you know, the wind doesn't always blow. Now, he didn't make that quote up himself, okay? When I was the environment critic, and I won't say the name, but somebody high up in Nova Scotia Power, after sitting through some questioning by me on renewable energy, told me, but Joan, you know, the wind doesn't blow all the time. Okay, it's not just the minister saying that. I'm sorry, but Nova Scotia Power, people that are at the top of the pyramid there, think the same way. Now, that's not a good thing, Mr. Speaker, I don't think, okay? So, let's face it. We also get that old adage all the time, too. Well, you know, we burn coal. We can't change overnight. Well, at this rate, you know, we got to move in some kind of a direction. We have to move, you know, not at a snail's pace. At least let's go at a turtle's pace or something, Mr. Speaker. Come on, like let's move a little bit faster on these kinds of issues. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's a shame. It really is that, you know, we're faced here today with a couple of lines on a piece of paper that really shows the missed opportunities that this government, the government in Nova Scotia, maybe they're going to address them down the road. I don't know. Maybe there's a bill waiting in the wings somewhere that's got more teeth to it. But it's, you know, I can't help expressing that it's the government's job to lead Nova Scotia Power. Nova Scotia Power is not going to do it on their own. They're there to make a profit. They're there to get a guaranteed 10% return, I believe, on, you know, on their for their shareholders. And it was a previous government that signed all those documents that made that happen. You know, we can cry over spilt milk now, but I think there's opportunities to move forward on. Right now in Nova Scotia, you can go through the energy audit. Now, I know some people can afford to do that, but I've got people phoning my office when they read about it in the paper, they hear about it in the radio, they don't see all the details. And unfortunately, a lot of people can't afford the $150 to start with. And then if they can afford the $150, someone comes in and they do your post-refit evaluation, okay? And they figure out what percentage of energy efficiency level you're at now in your home. And then they leave you with a list of possibilities that you can do to improve your energy, you know, improve the use of using less energy, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're all trying to do. And then they come in after you have spent however much money it's going to cost to upgrade, and that could be your installation. And we all know, Mr. Speaker, that, you know, the average, you know, if you put around $2,000 of insulation in your home, that makes a huge impact on the amount of energy you're going to save over the life of your home or how long you live in it. Unfortunately, a lot of people can just simply not afford. They don't have the $2,000. They don't have the $1,000. So instead, there's people like, you know, an example, I think we all received an email a while ago from, I think it was, I believe, a daughter. Her mom has been living in the same house since 1941. The house was never insulated. That senior is paying $420 a month for electricity to heat her home. We all know that the government grants are for home energy repairs. They're for emergency repairs only, those grants. And this lady has an income of $12,000 a year. Now, she, you know, if we're talking about a government that wants to keep seniors in their homes because it's more cost effective, they're happier there, they're in their communities with their loved ones, we got to find a way to keep them in their homes. We have to find a way to make their homes safe, secure, and energy efficient. And those are the kinds of things that we have to look at doing, Mr. Speaker. But again, you know, we've got a missed opportunity here. Government is not addressing our energy needs in a really defined, detailed process. They're not moving forward with our renewable energy and renewable energy strategy that has timelines that will show people that indeed the government is accountable, that when they make a promise, they keep a promise, and if they don't reach that timeline, they have to let us know why that didn't happen. They're not moving forward in helping us conserve energy. By Nova Scotia Power, it's fine and dandy for them to say, hang your clothes out on your clothesline. Well, we don't all have a clothesline. But the simplistic view that Nova Scotia Power is taking, well, you can't blame them, okay? They're in it for profit. But the government is again missing these opportunities. This is a huge opportunity for economic development. You know, we just, Human Resource Committee this morning had student reps in from the province talking about the cost of post-secondary education in Nova Scotia and how, you know, we've got a real problem with rural students not being able to access post-secondary education, and that it costs them more because, Mr. Speaker, they don't live here in the city where the universities are. They don't have, you know, they have to move from home, and most of the students are holding down 17, 20, 30-hour-week jobs on top of trying to get a post-secondary education. So why are we not looking at being the producers of technology for wind power, tidal power, solar power? Why are we not planning on being the exporters of this technology from our harbor to other parts of the world? Instead, I believe ships probably come in here loaded up with this stuff and head back out. I mean, you know, we're not producing this technology here. So this is a way for the province to move forward with economic development. Mr. Speaker, you know, recently, well, last summer before, I know a lot of the MLAs get out and they canvass their constituencies. And I, you know, was lucky enough to have a petition with me, which was our petition on the rate increase. That petition received over 32,000 signatures. And that was, you know, asking the government to stop the power increases, Nova Scotia Power, to stop the power increases until until people could receive some kind of help in reducing electricity consumption. I think Nova Scotia Power's answer to that was hang your clothes out in the clothesline. But people on low and fixed incomes, I can't say it enough, they are not prepared. They cannot afford another rate increase. Like, whether it's one a year, one every 2 years, you know, it really comes down to that. People are on fixed incomes. Seniors are making hard decisions. Single moms in the province are making hard decisions. Single dads in the province are making hard decisions. I mean, we're talking food versus heat here, Mr. Speaker. It's as simple as that. People on income assistance in Nova Scotia are the largest group that access our food banks. The most common person that goes to our food banks is a lone parent. More lone parents are accessing them. These parents are trying to feed 8,000 children in Nova Scotia. We know that the average power bill consumes 11% of a social assistance income. And in 2003, there were 2,131 households that had their power disconnected. Now, Nova Scotia Power goes out and disconnects people from being able to receive their power source. And, you know, that doesn't just happen like somebody says, oh, I'm just not going to bother paying my bill. They struggle. People are struggling to put food on the table, to heat their homes, to do what they can for their children. And oftentimes, you know, you'll cut back on your heat, but eventually, you know, you have to have some. And what happens is people just come to the point where they can't afford to pay it at all, Mr. Speaker. And it's very sad. And what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to have, you know, a bill that says Nova Scotia Power can't be granted more than one rate increase in a 12-month period. That's what we're going to do about it. We've missed an opportunity here. I'd like to see a bill come forward that says, how are we going to invest in tidal power? How are we going to invest in wind, solar power? How are we going to cut our emissions? We have the highest asthma rates, I think, still in Canada. We're one of the most polluted provinces. These are not something that, you know, we can be proud of. We need to be known, or come to be known, as an exporter of renewable technology. We need to invest in these kinds of projects. Mr. Speaker, recently now we've seen that the energy rebate on our oil wood pellets, and our propane, kerosene, and coal has come forward. The government was not going to bring that forward until January, and through pressure from us, we'll now see it come forward earlier. So I think, Nova Scotians, on the average, I guess, are hoping to save around $200 per year with this initiative. And so, there's something that is addressing the immediate concern, the immediate issue. But we need to have a vision. We need to go forward with a bigger plan so that we don't have to be reactive all the time. Like, we should be proactive. We're just reacting to crisis after crisis in our energy, with our energy problems. So, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Energy on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the member if I could ask her a question.
Will the Honourable Member accept a question from the Minister of Energy? The answer is no, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently I've had some correspondence with a lady that is involved with the YWCA. And this lady works in the office there in Women in Supported Housing is the department, I guess, that you would call that. And she is telling me that this increase is simply not acceptable. It's basically, the fourth or something that we've had in 2 years. I don't know. I can't keep track of it myself. Many people in my constituency are living below the poverty line. They simply, I'm sorry, cannot afford another power rate increase. That's the bottom line, okay? Now, this woman is asking me, what can you do to help these women? What can I do, Mr. Speaker? I can stand here and debate Bill number 20. I can talk about the things that I'd like the government to start working on and to start doing. But, my hands are tied. I'm not the government. I'm in the official opposition. So this is what Province House is for. It's for us to stand here, listen to one another, debate, thoughts, and see what kind of a reaction, and if anybody's listening, and they're going to go out there and do something about it. Mr. Speaker, I just want to, say thank you to the churches and service clubs in Dartmouth East and around my constituency, and the Salvation Army, that have really helped constituents in Dartmouth East. I wish they didn't have to do that, Mr. Speaker. Why, the food banks were supposed to be a temporary thing in Nova Scotia. How many people a year are they feeding now? I think it's a crutch for the government. If those disappeared, it's like if you took all the volunteers out of the school system, if you did all these things, where would that leave us? But, it's just simply not good enough. I am going to end by saying I hope that we see some bills in, the near future that address some of the issues that myself and other members from the Liberal Party, members from our party, have talked about here on this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I just hope somebody's been listening. So on that, I'm going to take my place. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery behind me, I would like to introduce to you, has he gone? Oh, he's gone. I'd like to introduce to you Casper the Ghost, who just disappeared. I was going to introduce my campaign manager and laud him on getting me reelected 3 times with ever-increasing majorities. Anyway, I will sit down, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry that the campaign manager is gone. I am sorry that the government is still here. However, Mr. Speaker, I do like to always begin on a positive note, and I will do so again today by saying that this bill is good in the fact that it is designed to restrict Nova Scotia Power, Inc. to one general increase in a 12-month period. And certainly that is much better than 1 times 2 or whatever. It's a situation where we have had up to 3 and maybe even 4 increases in a year. And a primary concern, I believe, of this bill is the fact that there is even an escape mechanism in relationship to this bill. If the board determines that exceptional circumstances exist, well, Mr. Speaker, that really concerns me, because the bill allows for a hearing to determine whether exceptional circumstances exist. Now, my question is, who is best represented at these hearings? Mr. Speaker, is it the hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians who are out there trying to eke out a living and to find enough money to pay for their household needs, including electricity costs? Or, Mr. Speaker, is it the power utility with the high-paid lawyers and the chartered accountants and all the other expertise that they have available to bring in for support at a hearing? Now, talking about hearing, I'm hearing a lot in my constituency of Pictou East about power rates. I'm going out into the constituency with office hours on a weekly basis, rotating office hours throughout the constituency every Thursday. And what I'm hearing from the people of Pictou East is that service was in fact better back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we've already had a bit of a debate in relationship to public versus private, and I will not get into that today, Mr. Speaker. However, what has changed? What has changed, Mr. Speaker, in the last 2 decades? Well, a lot of things have, and perhaps I'll even entertain something on the lighter side. But certainly, back in those days, in the 70s and 80s, and even back in the 60s, we never heard of interruptions by salty fog. Salty fog was not an issue back then. And one of the changes, Mr. Speaker, that just came to my mind as I was about to get up today is when you look at the changes in our households, one primary change, which is perhaps the lighter side that I was referring to, is in relationship to alarm clocks. Back in the old days, we had a basic clock. Today we have hybrid clocks. They're radios, and they don't make any noise. But yes, even digital. But the situation today, Mr. Speaker, is one that I know from a personal perspective, I've always, over the years, hated to have a clock in my bedroom close to my head with a tick, tick, tick. Now, all that we do lots of times, the thing that bothers me even more than that tick, tick, tick is the constant flash, flash, flash when the power has been out and the power has come back on. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how many times I have looked at that alarm clock in recent times, and I've seen that flash, 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 because the power has been out. Just in the last week, Mr. Speaker, in my hometown of Westville, Mr. Speaker, Halloween came twice. It came on October the 31st, and the very next night, a huge transformer was sending off sparks like you would not believe. It did that for quite some time before the darn thing exploded. Mr. Speaker, a large number of residents in my community and extending right out into the member from Pictou West, right out to Salem, were without power for a period of time in relationship to that transformer. That's just a little example of what we're experiencing. And the very same night, I understand that the power went off twice in the metro area because of that salty fog. The salty fog was there. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm really concerned about what's happening with this. And to have a bill that has a one-sentence explanatory note, Mr. Speaker, to have a bill that is a half a page when we could be dealing with tidal power, when we could be dealing with wind power and hydropower, I think it's fundamentally wrong that we deal with such a bill that is designed, Mr. Speaker, I believe, to clean up one of the messes. We could call this a mess-cleaning bill. And, Mr. Speaker, that is...
Order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour on a point of order.
Thank you. No. A question, if the member would entertain a question.
If the Honourable Member entertain a question.
Mr. Speaker, I have a limited period of time, and I will entertain any speakers when I'm through in any questions.
Order, please. I would take that.
But not at this moment.
No. Yes, the Honourable Member for Pictou East has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, in Pictou County, $45 million has been allocated to do some major overhaul of stack number 5 in Trenton. And there is a move afoot by the Power Inc. to come up with a bagging system to collect the particulate matter that is coming out of the stacks. Mr. Speaker, the question being put to me in Pictou County is who will pay for the $45 million being spent there? Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering, will it be the shareholders that will invest in this, or will it be the ratepayers who come up with footing the bill for that $45 million? And my guess is that there's a reason why they call us the ratepayers, because I think it's going to come back to us. Mr. Speaker, I have had over 325 concerns presented to me since June the 13th of a very serious nature. Not just the phone calls, but those that require a lot of looking into. And Mr. Speaker, I have one here from a constituent who is legally blind, who is an advocate for the disabled, who is an advocate for the poor and for the destitute. And he's asking me a series of questions in relationship to Nova Scotia Power, Inc. And the first one is, who will pay for the Stora Enso break? who will pay for the Stora Enso break? He's asking about bonuses that are paid to executives of Nova Scotia Power Inc. And he's asking, why are bonuses paid to people when they are doing a good job? Because isn't it expected that if you're a high-paid executive that you're going to be doing a good job? His question is, what is the salary of the current CEO? He says that the previous CEO was from the United States and spent 25% of his time here. And he's wondering what the status is of the present CEO. I think these are good questions, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. He goes on with a series of other concerns as well, and I intend to investigate and look into those concerns for him. But, Mr. Speaker, last night the member for Halifax Chebucto talked about a new word that was being used in circles in relationship to power. And that was energy poverty. Energy poverty, Mr. Speaker. And I'm running into that on a day-by-day basis in my constituency. I had a person come to me the other day and say, Clary, I have a $150 power bill that I can't pay, and the power is going to be turned off within 2 days. Mr. Speaker, I have had a number of cases like that where I have had to intervene on power bills, where I have had to talk to the head of customer services for Northern Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I know that on this very day in my constituency, there are some people who are very, very concerned about getting power bills paid. And I say that because by this point, this House should realize that one of the primary concerns that I have is outmigration. And outmigration is occurring to such a great extent in my constituency because just at this time last year, there were 1,000 workers at Trenton Works. 400 of them were laid off before Christmas last year. 550 of them, of the remaining 600, were laid off a few weeks ago. And I was told by the president of the union yesterday that the current employment figure is now 28 workers. 28 workers, and there were 1,000 last year. A number of people working at Trenton Works have come to me regarding their bill situation, because not only are they waiting for the 2 weeks qualifying period for EI, but they are also waiting for that very vital first check. And the power bills that are on their fridges waiting to be paid are a real concern to them. And they're an extra concern because of the increases that have taken place within the last year. Mr. Speaker, there are some people who are going to bed tonight in Nova Scotia, will be going to bed tonight in Nova Scotia. They will be awakening in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, being very concerned about power and other bills that they cannot afford to pay. They're having nightmares over their bills, Mr. Speaker, and I can't help but sort of contrast that to the pleasant dreams that other people may be having of profit. Mr. Speaker, this is a serious situation that we face with Nova Scotia Power, Inc. It's a situation that requires more than a half-a-page bill. And on that note, I am about to conclude by saying, Mr. Speaker, I wish there were, in fact, a better way than Bill 20 to transfer just a little comfort from shareholders and provide a little comfort to the ratepayers. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Pleased to rise in my place today and say a few words about Bill 20. Much has been said about the lack of overall verbiage in this bill, and I want to also put my 2 cents worth about the lack of really any large amount of substance to this bill. The premise of the bill, I think most people agree with. But the problem is, and it's indicative of this government in a large way, is we do have a problem in the electrical marketplace. We do. And so what they do, rather than this government coming forward and looking at the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee, their report from 2 years ago, they bring in these little bills that nibble around the edges of the problem in the energy market in this province and don't do anything substantive. And substantive, and I will get to this later, but it's obviously other modes of producing energy, and so that we're not bound to the NSPI's version of how we produce our energy. Because, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that Nova Scotia Power has tied itself heavily with coal generation, and they're quite happy to stay there. Although they do it, I would say, with a great deal of inefficiencies. You know, back in the early spring of this year, of '06, or late winter, the Power Authority at this time was talking about putting scrubbers on the generating station at Lingam, which is the largest generating station in the province, and which happens to be one of the largest polluters in all of Canada, not just this province, but of all of Canada. And we have now seen that they can't get consensus on what precipitators to use. So now that thing, that project has been shelved for a while until they go back and reconfigure and decide what they're going to do. Now, where is government in all of this? They're going to go back to NSPI and say, okay, you know, you can only come to us for a rate increase once a year, except under extraordinary circumstances. But they basically ignored this real problem. In my community, Mr. Speaker, we have continuous problems with fly ash, and we know we have that in Pictou County and so on. But in Dartmouth North, Mr. Speaker, it's a problem throughout this province. But what does government choose to do? Does government say, you know what, we got to look at the EMGHC or EMGC and say, what are we going to do? Let's look at this bill, or let's look at this report on the governance, and it's done by experts. It went out, was asked for by government. They initiated, they went out and picked the experts to do this, and now they're studying it. Now, did government go and say, look, you know what, some of this information is flawed, and so what we're going to do is we're going to ask another group of experts to study it? No, Mr. Speaker. Matter of fact, in question period last week, when I was asking the Minister of Energy on this very subject, it's the handpicked leader of Conserve Nova Scotia who's going to tell us what the experts have already told us. So, Mr. Speaker, where is that at? What and where does that make any sense? We have someone who's told us that they know absolutely nothing about the energy sector, nothing about conserving energy, but yet she is going to be the final arbiter on what that the EMGC said, Mr. Speaker. Does that make sense? The EMGC has come up with some proposals that, if they were put forward here, we could debate them in this House. And we could bring them forward, and we would have a more substantive bill than Bill 20, Mr. Speaker. We would not be just talking about one small little aspect of how we improve the energy costs in this province. But yet this government, rather than say, look, we are a minority government. There's more people sitting on this side of the House than that side of the House. Let's work towards a compromise. And so we'll use this as an opportunity. We'll take this opportunity now to formulate an energy policy that all Nova Scotians can embrace. No, this government has chose the do nothing or do very little attitude. What they've decided to do is give us these little moves. And, you know, later on we'll be debating Bill 84, which suffers from the same problem. It does not go, it takes energy and just kind of piecemeals it, as opposed to looking at it and making us real players in a green economy. It just grabs little bits and pieces that makes no real sense and no real difference in the marketplace. Often by themselves, they're not offensive changes. This Bill 20 is not offensive. It's only, I guess, if it is offensive, it's offensive in its lack of overall vision for this province. That's what's wrong with it. I don't think anybody on any side of this House is necessarily against the fact that the regulators should curtail the utility coming back just once a year. I think most people here agree with that. But this government has really done nothing substantive. Because, you know, my colleague from Pictou East started talking earlier about the impact of Trenton Works, and indeed about Stora Enso and the large suppliers. Well, I'm not so much worried about who's going to pay for that. One would always hope that Stora will pay for its own dime, and that's fine. But what really worries me, Mr. Speaker, without a comprehensive energy plan for this province, the Trenton Works may never open again in a substantive way. What we'll have with Bowater, what effect does that, and what effect does the Stora have? Because if you listened last year, Stora's problem was its ability to forecast for a decent view into the future, 5-6 years, so that they could stabilize that market, because we all know what the international markets around pulp and paper are. And that's what they're looking for. And that's what I think, in a roundabout way, they were saying to government, was help us with this vision. But government has ignored that. Government has ignored industry and its role here of trying to stabilize our energy market. We've completely ignored it. But we're going to pander to a very small and say, look what we've done. Much to, like question period today, when we debated about the substantive thing they did around crime. It's stuff it's bills they haven't proclaimed. It's other bills that are off in the future. Nothing in the present, Mr. Speaker. So there's absolutely no vision here, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, as my colleague now last night from Halifax, Chebucto, spoke much more eloquent than I could about the overall ownership of NSPI. And it's not, you know, Mr. Speaker, he is absolutely right that the ownership of NSPI is so far out of this province, it's sometimes more than a half a world away. That, you know, it's run and it's not motivated for the people of Nova Scotia. It's motivated for the profitability of its investors. And those investors, by and large, aren't residents of this province. So their idea is they don't care if you burn coal and no precipitators on a stack. They don't care if the land is laid to waste. You know, it's just a matter of being able to reap that profit, Mr. Speaker. That's what they're not living here. So why should they worry about that? So with the absence of real ownership and the province being involved as a regulator, that's where we got to show vision. So that's what I would have liked to have seen in Bill 20. A real idea around energy marketplace, an electricity marketplace, Mr. Speaker. But this government does not want to bring that forward. This government does not want to be a forward-thinking government that would allow its citizens to do this, to have real debate about the larger issues in this House where we should be. We've seen ministers getting up and wanting to ask members of our caucus questions today, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know what? Those ministers, I hope those ministers are asking their cabinet colleagues questions about this bill, not our members. We're trying to educate them, but they should be asking those questions in cabinet. That's the problem, Mr. Speaker. But apparently they're not. I don't know if they're being muzzled or whatever, but the reality is, why aren't we looking at the more substantive issues around the energy marketplace as opposed to a small bill like Bill 20, Mr. Speaker? You know, many of us, we can all talk about the problems with the service around Nova Scotia Power, and indeed, Nova Scotia Power is an easy mule to kick. You know, it doesn't take any great orator to say nasty things about the NSPI. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I've got to really look at this and say, you know, that I have just within 3 kilometers of my house the largest polluter in this, one of the largest polluters in this country, and that's Lingayen Generating Station. And you know, there is the overall problem with that when you see that the people in Dominion, when they suffer from the fly ash and so on, and the hazards it has to their health, the damage it does to their automobiles, the sidings on their house, all these things. And then you have other problems too, Mr. Speaker. When you have an ongoing battle with Nova Scotia Power and the amount of water it takes from CBRM and on a demand load, and to the point that residents on Hinchy Avenue in the Waterford are having problems getting clean water, potable water, to even do stuff like their wash, where they come out and they're gray and dirty because they're causing such a power, or just a surge of water, and they're using overcapacity. But yet, you know, when we talk to Nova Scotia Power about that, they deny doing it. You talk to CBRM and they say, yes, they are doing it, and trying to get to the bottom of this, right? And so if we had a full discussion, around the electricity marketplace, Mr. Speaker, then Bill 20 may be a more substantive bill than what we see in front of us today. But still, the people in my community that I represent still have these problems. You know, there was people there last year when Nova Scotia Power, everyone was out when they were going to put the precipitators on, but nobody was there from this government to talk about the problem when they pulled back from it. And many of us can remember, it was the weekend before the June 13th election is when they brought it up, that no, we're backing off from it. Well, where was government to play a role in that? Well, government was silent on it, Mr. Speaker, much like this bill. And overall, it's silent. So one would hope that you know, as this bill moves forward, we'll say, that the government will realize the error of its way, and when it gets over to law amendments, they'll say, you know what, we're not just going to put water in that soup. We're actually going to put meat and vegetables in it. We're really going to thicken it, and we're going to make it something substantive for Nova Scotians to get a hold on. But I don't hold any great hope for that, Mr. Speaker. But you know, many of my colleagues too spoke on the fact of what Nova Scotia Power is using for their source of energy, and coal, and the problems that concern. But you know, Mr. Speaker, as you well know, and many of us members from up around Spring Hill and Cape Breton and Pictou County know all too well the line blood on the coal, Mr. Speaker. And that's probably echoed fairly loudly now when we see some of the areas that NSPI goes out to get its fuel source from in third world countries such as Colombia, and the conditions those workers are forced to work in, Mr. Speaker, that Bill 20 does not address at all. That these workers are not much better than slave or feudal type systems they work in. Whole towns being destroyed by the mine barons and so on, Mr. Speaker. People being killed and maimed in these mines. But yet, when these incidents are brought forward to the Power Corp, it seems to just roll off its back. It says, well, you know, that's the cost of doing business. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I come from a perspective that people should not have to give up their lives to work. You should work to live, not to die, Mr. Speaker. But that is a blight on a Nova Scotian industry, and it goes back to the fact that industry is not owned by Nova Scotians. It's owned by people far from the borders of this province, and I would say indeed far from the borders of this country. And yet we'll be the ones marred with that, because it does have the name Nova Scotia on it, and we will have that blot on our record, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, I guess none of us can really speak and try to give up the opportunity of this fog story from the other week, because it's truly a bizarre story. I mean, it's only made more bizarre that the PR flacks from Nova Scotia Power would actually expect us and the public to believe it. You know, I think as long as I can remember in this province, we've had fog. You know, maybe you know, maybe at the height of the building over here where their headquarters are, maybe the fog doesn't reach up that high. I don't know, but Mr. Speaker, we've had fog here since forever. I don't know, maybe places where we have the internal sunshine, like city mines, it never gets foggy. You know, maybe on Cranberry it's just so it's tropical. I don't know, Mr. Speaker. You could probably fill me in on that better. But nonetheless, all of a sudden, after over half a century, more than a half a century of producing electricity in this province, that all of a sudden fog is causing outages. Fog in Atlantic Canada. Who would ever have thunk it, huh? That we'd have fog in Atlantic Canada. You know, Margaret Murphy, who God love her. I mean, you know, she did a great job for then Premier Russell McClellan. She's doing just a great job for Nova Scotia Power. But to come and say that to her, to say that and voice that on the people of Nova Scotia, is rather embarrassing. It's rather embarrassing. I mean, look, if it's inadequacy of maintenance, well then say it. But don't, you know, don't be putting it out there, because even scientists will tell you that there's no such thing actually, because the salt will dissipate in the fog. It doesn't rise with the fog. That it dissipates and doesn't. It's just water vapor. There's no salt in that vapor. It's as simple as that. And they know that. So why would they purport that and put that out there for hardworking Nova Scotians to try and swallow, Mr. Speaker? So that's quite erroneous. But yet we're out there to do this. But you know, if again I got to go back to the premise of the bill, and if Bill 20 was to talk about that, talk about maintenance and so on, then this bill we'd have less to talk about if there was more in the bill. If that makes sense, Mr. Speaker. But it's true, because we would not be here. We would be engaged in a very earnest debate, I'm sure, more earnest maybe than even this one. But that we would be able to say to the people of Nova Scotia, look, that this is a substantive piece of legislation, and we're really moving forward. We're moving forward, Mr. Speaker, and even from New Waterford all the way to Amherst, Mr. Speaker. All the way to Amherst, we would from border to border, Mr. Speaker, that we would go out and we would try to do something substantive. No, what we have here is a little bill that nibbles at the edges, barely breaks a sweat, if you will, Mr. Speaker, when it talks about what we can do about the energy problems that face Nova Scotia. You know, we have, like I said, we have Bill 84 coming up fairly soon in this House, Mr. Speaker, talking about wind energy, and you know, and how it's going to be taxed municipally, and I think that's again on its face a very good bill, but again we have there is some inadequacies around it. And I'll certainly talk more about that when that bill is brought forward in this House. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, some of the suggestions that we see around here as it relates to the energy concerns is, you know, we have groups now talking to us about tidal power. We have wind energy. Actually, we even have wave power. I think, well, that's not such a large item for energy consumption here. It is certainly in British Columbia. It seems to be hitting a stride there, and it's certainly something to look forward to. As any kind of energy change, it has its pros and cons. But as it relates to the production and how it may affect fish habitat, and I'm sure some tidal power operations, you know. Mr. Speaker, certain things I think we look at, even one of the like real jewels in our energy production in this province is Wreck Cove. Now, Mr. Speaker, Wreck Cove is a peak demand type plant, as you're well aware of, and it's one that's used just at peak hours, morning and noon and supper hour, and then I don't think it produces on weekends or on holidays, but by and large it's used for peak demand. And I want to assure my colleagues here from the HRM that that's who's the prime beneficiary of that power, are people here in HRM. And I also want to, I don't want to ever get into a debate in this House when I stand up about energy production, and remind everybody in this House of in the 70s when everybody was being told to let them freeze in the dark, that what energy source saved the bacon of Nova Scotians, and that was the coal miners of Cape Breton. They opened mines, and these men worked hard, long hours, and kept the economy of this province going, Mr. Speaker. And there's a debt to be paid to those miners that some people seem to forget in their zealousness about, because it was a Crown corporation, and people thought that these men didn't, that it was all a free ride for them. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, and I'm sure you know firsthand also, about the work that they've done, and the hard work, and indeed, yes, some paid with their lives, and some are still paying today with broken bodies and so on, Mr. Speaker. So I want to make sure that gets on the record in this debate. No matter what we ever do with our energy needs in this province, that this province will always owe a great deal of debt to the miners of Cape Breton for what they have done, especially in the 70s when there was sectors here that were in great trouble of folding and so on. But we helped the industry going. We helped the Michelins go because they could get power. We sold coal under the market rate, and so on, Mr. Speaker. And some would say that was probably the downfall of the Cape Breton Development Corporation, because for years we supplied coal at below the market rate when we could have shipped it offshore. But no, Mr. Speaker, we had a Nova Scotia First policy, and I think you know, a lot of people should be cognizant of that sometimes when you think about when people say, well, these miners in Cape Breton got a lot of stuff for free. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you, as someone who had meat and potatoes on his table because of a coal miner, as you did too, Mr. Speaker, that it was not an easy life, and they deserved every penny and more, I would suspect. They deserve a great deal of our respect. But, Mr. Speaker, a lot of these things have since gone, that we don't see that this being a, that we don't look at that, and I mean, I would suspect that was in an era when both those regimes were owned by government entities, one a federal, one a provincial, and as my colleague from Pictou West said, that's probably a debate for another day. But it's important that, you know, it really underlies what, when we have control of the resource that creates our energy, how the marketplace works for us. And that's why I think we go back to talk about renewables, and if we can get our own renewables here, how important that will be for us to take over the destiny of our energy production, Mr. Speaker. You know, you know, there's some within the wind energy sector, Mr. Speaker. I know there's some difference. There's some bigger ones. There's some that are run by municipalities and some other smaller entities. and this is a constant to and fro how they can best become economically viable, and I think that debate will take place very soon, I hope. But yet that's an industry that could have been encouraged had we gone with the EMGC, had we take that report and moved it forward rather than leave a political entity, if you will, to decide the future of that report. I don't think that was a wise or prudent decision, but nevertheless, that was what the Premier opted for, and I think it's one that will be more harmful. It lacks the vision, as I said earlier, and that's what Bill 20 does not give us. It does not give us vision, Mr. Speaker. That once a year, I guess the idea and once a year is an interesting one, because while it ensure you that they will only ask once a year, except for really kind of catastrophic reasons other than that, but it will assure you that they will be here every year, whether they need one or not. There'll be no benefit holidays like the government took with the healthcare workers. They will be here. They will be here every year. They'll be sitting there, and my colleague from Pictou East complained about his alarm clocks. Well, their alarm clock will be set, and it will beep about 2 days before, and they'll say, let's get the brief together because we want another raise. We're owed it. It's our month. Our year is up. Come on. So what we have assured ourselves here, that they will be in front of URB every year. Every year they'll be here saying, we are entitled. We're entitled. Here it is. Our year's up. Here's our note from the Premier. Our year's up. He said, give us a year. Here's our note. And pass the note over, and we'll move on from there. So you've guaranteed that every year, the only people really happy about this are Nova Scotia Power and the commissioners of the URB that knows that they'll have a little job to do once a year. So, Mr. Speaker, that's a problem that we will see here. But does Bill 20 contemplate that? No, because it is a bill that lacks any real vision and that we can talk about what goes on in the energy sector. We have stock here, Mr. Speaker, in lines and transmission lines and power poles that were just, they're literally, excuse me, falling apart. And that's part of what happened the other week. And that, there is transmission lines that now, with Nova Scotia Power coming out of Lingan Generating Station, that are 30 years old now. These towers, I don't know how often they're inspected. I know they have a right-of-way on my property to go in, and I'm going to tell you, in the last 10 years, I haven't seen them use that right-of-way. My brother-in-law next door, same thing. They haven't used that right-of-way to go up. There's a horse track up there that's plowed. They can go right up there to the racetrack, the jogging track. If they can get right in there, the Premier said the good horsemen live there. Yes, and I got to say, there's some good horsemen in Inverness County. Mr. Speaker, some of my very good friends, and I would think that the Premier would agree that we have mutual friends there that are in the horse industry that we won't name them because they would embarrass them. But, Mr. Speaker, that is a good industry, and I'm getting the eye from the Speaker that I think I'm wandering off the bill a little bit, but it was rabbit tracks from the Premier. But Mr. Speaker. Well, no, Mr. Speaker, it's electrical power or horsepower. I just get them mixed up, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's right. I think it's another name for a donkey, Mr. Speaker, but for me. Mr. Speaker, but this is a very serious. We wish that the government would have brought forward a bill, though, that would have helped Nova Scotia see a vision around our energy needs, because we are like looking at a time when renewables are coming up. We saw reports just last week out of Britain of what's going on and the future around what's going to happen with greenhouse gases and so on. And these are times that this is something I think where we may disagree in the kind of roadmap to get there, but we know where we want to go, and there may be debate around it. And this is the time to seize it, because we see that the community is ready to talk seriously about alternate energy sources. The province as a whole are willing to go and say, look, we need this. We need this for our future. We can't be continuously mortgaging our children's future around using carbon-based fuels. We've got to start looking at other things. But yet this bill will not offer this. This bill offers us just a very small little nibble, Mr. Speaker. Bill 20 does not offer the people of this province much at all. So, Mr. Speaker, while in essence I support this bill, that I think there's much to be done, and I think the government owes it to the people of Nova Scotia to bring in a bill that is more substantive, a bill that will really tell people that, you know, that we as 52 members in this House are worried about what's happening today, what's going to happen to the future, what energy needs means to our economy. That's what we're asking for this government to bring forward. We, as a whole, I said, will be supporting this bill, but I'd wished, and maybe time is not too short, that the government will look at the EMGC, bring the recommendations forward, let us all debate, Mr. Speaker, and that's where we'll be at. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's just a few comments I would like to make as well on Bill number 20, which is the Act to amend the Public Utilities Act. Certainly, I've learned a lot in listening to previous speakers, and we've certainly been all over the map when it comes to energy and in relation to this bill. But at the same time, I think it's a subject that's very important to the people of Nova Scotia, and you know, we need to debate and consider the way that Nova Scotia Power deals with customers, the way that government can control or work with Nova Scotia Power as well to ensure that we have a reliable power provider for the province. As has been said, Nova Scotia Power has a virtual monopoly. There's really no other producers of energy of any size. A little bit of wind power that we've talked about, and a need to do an awful lot more to increase the amount of green energy that this province produces. And that means helping the entrepreneurs who want to engage in that kind of development of green energy, and also making a regulatory environment that's going to favor that rather than create obstacles, Mr. Speaker. Because we all feel very strongly in the Liberal caucus, and I'm sure others in this House as well, that the way to go in future has got to be to set the bar high, that Nova Scotia will be a leader in green energy, and we are not doing anything to position ourselves really in that way. We are slow to adapt and to innovate and to modify, partly because of our regulatory environment and our frankly, because of the nature of minority government, I would suggest. Because it takes some bold thinking and it takes some strong action to bring in a plan that would really encourage green energy in this province and take our attention away from the status quo, which has been power plants that are using very low-quality coal, which creates very bad air. And you know it better than anyone, Mr. Speaker. In Cape Breton, as was mentioned, the coal-fired plants are very damaging in terms of the health of the population. And here in HRM, Tufts Cove is another example of a power generation facility that is spewing out a lot of pollution. And we know, again, that Nova Scotia Power ranks among the top 5 polluters in the entire country. And here we are in Nova Scotia ranking in the top 5 on a list we don't want to be on. You would expect that those big polluters would be in the heartland of Canada where the big industry is. You might expect it would be in Ontario or in Quebec where there's some really heavy industries. But no, the top polluters are here, one of the top polluters here in our own province, Mr. Speaker. And the cost of that is extreme. It isn't just an isolated idea that we're talking about. We're talking about health costs, and we're talking about respiratory problems. And Nova Scotia has one of the highest rates, I believe the highest rate of asthma in the country. It's either Nova Scotia or PEI. Together having that dubious distinction. We have childhood asthma, we have respiratory problems, we have a high rate of cancer. You know, these can be traced back to environmental problems. And I think when we're looking at the cost of energy and we're looking at the regulatory environment for Nova Scotia Power, it's really important that some more bold thinking come to the fore and that we start to look at ways that we can address this. And as I say, there's a certain inertia that comes with minority government, and I think we know that ourselves sitting here, and perhaps the public doesn't know that inertia sets in and people don't want to do bold things. The government doesn't want to propose things that are are going to create a lot of change or discussion. And therefore, we do small bills, as was just mentioned by the previous speaker. This is a small bill, Bill number 20, to make a small change in the way Nova Scotia Power does business and how we regulate the business of Nova Scotia Power. And this bill is proposing only that we prevent the government, or that prevent Nova Scotia Power from asking for more than one rate increase per year. And that's a great idea, given that sometimes they have come for more than one, and there's been a threat that they'll come for extra increases in a given year. And so clearly, we would want to control that and say that once a year is plenty. But one of the things I'd like to mention, Mr. Speaker, is just what a costly process it is to go before the Utility and Review Board. I had I guess the privilege of being there not long ago to sit in for those hearings. The Liberal caucus was an intervener at that time, and so we were following all of the proceedings. And it went on for days and days, Mr. Speaker, and the lawyers for both sides wheeled in entire bookcases full of all of their background details, all of the information that supported their relative, whichever side of the case they were on. For Nova Scotia Power, it was their lawyers making a strong case for why they needed to have an increase and all the costs and all the pressures they faced. On the other side, there were other people wheeling in their bookcases full of material on poverty, on the impact of high costs of energy for business, and other interveners. We certainly had interveners from the large pulp and paper companies whose work is very much affected, their profits completely affected by the cost of energy, which is probably their single largest overhead cost. And so they came in their strength with their lawyers, and this process went on for days and days with our Utility and Review Board members listening to all of the evidence, and then they have to go away with their lawyers. So, Mr. Speaker, as you can only imagine, there's a huge cost to doing that for all the stakeholders, for the interveners and all the players and the government as well. And, you know, I see us going more and more to putting more work on the shoulders of the Utility and Review Board. And certainly they do a good job, and they're dealing with these things well. But I'm not sure that we are not making too much use of them, and that some of these decisions could be made here or could be made by the government, rather than having everything go before the Utility and Review Board. But again, we don't want to see Nova Scotia Power having more than one increase a year, so clearly this bill will have support. But I have to go back to what the previous member spoke of, and that is that this is really just a tiny detail in a picture that needs a complete strategy. And, you know, we can have a multitude of these bills come before us. One I'd like to suggest to the government is one that would prevent Nova Scotia Power from disconnecting power in the winter months. I think that's been discussed in the past. Some provinces have that in place. That'd be another little piece that's very important that would protect poor people who perhaps are behind in their payments from being cold in the winter. And I think as members, we've all had individual constituents who've come to us in concern in the winter, and I had one last March whose power was disconnected. And it was still cold, and she was a single mother with 2 children in her apartment. So this is a problem, and that's another issue that I hope the Premier's listening. I see that he is. I'm sure that he is going to consider that suggestion as well while we're looking at small pieces of the puzzle that we can put together. But really, as I say, one of the things we need to consider most of all is a bigger strategy for power and power generation and sale in this province. And without some dramatic changes in our thinking, we're going to continue to support the status quo, which means that we're going to have a lot of high energy costs that we can't control because we're reliant on coal, we're reliant on fossil fuels. We haven't taken any dramatic steps to alter that scenario. Other parts of the country use natural gas in significant quantities. Certainly Alberta and all the way across Ontario and Quebec use natural gas. But here in this province, we have 85% of our households using either oil or electricity for heat. And that makes us doubly vulnerable, Mr. Speaker, to the impacts of these high world energy prices. And for that reason, you know, I think that we need to have some dramatic thinking, whether it's a round table, whether we involve industry, But we have to signal as legislators that we're not satisfied with the status quo and that something has to change. And it won't start until the government begins to ask for that to happen. Because if you're comfortably guaranteeing your investors a certain return, and if you're able to go annually and get an increase, or at least ask for that increase through the mechanisms of the Utility and Review Board, then Nova Scotia Power is in a comfortable position of being able to kind of go steady as she goes and not make any dramatic changes or dramatic investment in different kinds of energy. And I know that there's a lot of risks associated with a switch to wind energy, and I'm not saying that is the panacea for all of our resource or power generation problems, but I do think there needs to be some pressure brought to bear to get Nova Scotia Power to consider these things more seriously. Another example would be the natural gas that I was speaking about, that we actually have flowing right now, flowing in pipelines through our province, and we're not making use of it. And I know there's been an announcement not long ago that we were going to convert the hospitals and I believe the Dalhousie and St. Mary's to natural gas, and that's a good step forward, although I have no idea when that pipeline is going to reach over to this part of the city. But right now, natural gas is available at Tufts Cove, and Nova Scotia Power is not utilizing it in any significant way. I'm not sure if they do it at all. And really what I've been told is that they get more money back by selling it through to the United States, letting it flow right through our province, right through New Brunswick, and sell it in the United States for a better price. But we could intervene. We only have at most maybe 20 years worth of that Sable project of natural gas. It's not infinite. And we're going to sit here year after year and watch it flow to the United States and fuel their industry and their economy, while we accept air quality that's poor and pollution that we shouldn't accept in Nova Scotia, especially when the alternative is flowing by the door of one of the power generation plants, Mr. Speaker. That can be utilized anytime, and it's not being utilized. So maybe it requires some regulation. Maybe we should be looking at a bill right now that would require Nova Scotia Power to make use of the natural gas that is available to it right now and help to improve the air quality here in this city and in other parts of the province. I mean, we're accepting right now that the health department is our biggest single department, that it absorbs coming on close to 50% of our budget, and that's because we have health issues and health problems, and we know that some of them are related to air quality. So why would we not take some steps to do something meaningful about that? That's really the sort of questions that I think are important and that we should be discussing in this legislature. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the reason that the speakers before me have also gone off topic is because these are pressing issues and they're not before the legislature for us to talk about directly. So I know you're going to offer me the same opportunity as the preceding speakers. However, I do recognize that we are drifting off the immediate topic of having an annual review of the rates of Nova Scotia Power. That's right. Anyway, it's a very small, as I say, a very small bill. We're glad to see it in that it will prevent multiple increases annually, but it does create a pattern where Nova Scotia Power asks for some double-digit increase and ultimately gets a single-digit increase. And they're quite happy. Maybe that's the plan all along. Yes, Mr. Speaker? No? Anyway, Is Nova Scotia moving away from its dependence on fossil fuels and taking a lead? And as I say, every year that we let go by, Mr. Speaker, we are not the leaders. Other jurisdictions are taking that lead. And I've heard New York mentioned recently when I was listening to a radio documentary, California taking big steps. In fact, what was said was both those states have gone ahead of their federal governments in making strong legislation and good rules that will protect their citizens and start to move into the wave of the future, which is to move away from fossil fuels and this dependency. And yet in Nova Scotia, we say it. I think every party has said it, that we want to be leaders and world leaders and show the way, but we're not doing it. And I would like to see something that I guess pushes us beyond the inertia of this House so that we can start to set that direction and start to make some really strong demands of industry and big incentives to help people that want to take the risk to go and develop these alternatives that we need so badly. Again, as I said, we're very different from the rest of the country. In our province, 60% of households either wholly or partly use home heating oil to fuel their house. The national average is 12.5%. You know how vulnerable we are to the high costs of oil, and we saw it in the summer with gasoline for cars. The prices spike, and Nova Scotia, with less than 1 million people, a small amount of industry, 3% of the Canadian market, is not about to influence world energy prices. That's beyond our control. So what we need to do, Mr. Speaker, is look for alternative ways that we can be better prepared for these cost increases, because although they ease off again at different times in the year and they're cyclical, overall the pressure is for increasing prices, and they're just going to move up and up over time. So I think that we know that that's going to come, and there's no point in having our heads buried in the sand and expect that it won't. We know that that's the move. So we need programs that are going to help people be more fuel efficient, have their homes be more fuel efficient and better insulated, ways that we can have the same amount of energy go further, and that's the way we're going to help Nova Scotians. And I think that requires, again, a concerted effort, a strategy, a plan, and we've not even really begun to scratch the surface on those things. And Conserve Nova Scotia may have some hope in the future, but their first big announcement was just for the replacement of furnaces and nothing else. You know, they've had 3 or 4 months to go away and vision, and they come back with one small program for the replacement well, they outsourced their visioning and came back with the idea of one small program to start with. And there are so many other things that can be done. There's been other bills before the House, I would say private members' bills from the opposition benches, that have suggested other things that would be part of an overall strategy, one by one. And again, going back to Bill 20 and Nova Scotia Power and their role, I really find that the emphasis is so much towards the big consumers of energy and to the needs of Nova Scotia Power, and very little to the individuals who are very dependent on these rates in terms of making their ends meet. It's a major bill in most households to cover electricity. And I notice in this bill, in Clause 3, it actually says that the board can actually come back for another increase during the year if there's exceptional circumstances that have caused or will cause substantial financial harm to the ratepayers of the utility or to the utility. Now, I certainly understand how the utility will speak up for itself when it's experiencing some kind of exceptional harm, but I'm not sure who the voice will be for the ratepayers who are suddenly feeling the pinch and are under some sort of exceptional harm as the year progresses. I have a good idea that will never be invoked on behalf of the ratepayers, and I think it's lip service to have included it in there to say that we care about both sides of the coin, both the ratepayers and the utility itself. So I would love to know what mechanism would ever trigger the exceptional decrease in the rates that would be based on hardship for the ratepayers. I think that really almost bears looking at in some further detail, because having put it in there, I really don't believe that it would ever be triggered to lower the rates in the midst of a year after you've allowed a rate increase for a utility. So I hope that the government will continue to work with groups that are trying to lobby for the needs of low-income Nova Scotians and their need for the security of electricity for heat and power for their daily living. There are a number of groups that have spoken out about this, and I believe that they need to be included in consultations as we go forward on anything to do with power and power rates. I think really what I'm saying today is that there is a sense of urgency that's needed here in the legislature, and that this bill should pass, and it can go to law amendments, I'm sure, and I hope we will hear from a few of the stakeholders around this bill, particularly those who are concerned about poverty and about the impact of power rates on those that live on social assistance or live, on very limited income, because that's going to make a big difference as well. But, as it stands, the bill has our support in the Liberal caucus, and we hope to see that would be a maximum number of times for Nova Scotia Power to seek increases in a given year. As I say, I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, that it doesn't go far enough to start mapping out or even signaling that the government has an intent to do something more far-reaching and something with more vision than what we're seeing here on this single bill with just a very small aspect that it's proposing. But, Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to law amendments. I hope that this will be will be noted by the ratepayers and by consumers, and that we will hear from them as well at law amendments. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad for an opportunity to speak to this piece of legislation. I guess I'll preface my comments with some information from the Emera website, and whether members would know, but the third quarter net earnings for the company are up this year, Mr. Speaker. The consolidated net earnings were $19.5 million for the third quarter in 2006, compared to $15.9 million in the third quarter of 2005. So a difference of approximately $4 million, slightly less. And Mr. Speaker, I'll quote from this and I'll table it for the members. The quarterly earnings improvement reflects higher earnings at the company's largest subsidiary, Nova Scotia Power, Inc. NSPI's contribution to consolidated earnings was $12.7 million in the third quarter 2006, compared with $2.7 million in the third quarter 2005, a difference of $10 million, Mr. Speaker. The reestablishment of earnings levels in 2006 is due to the combined effect of an electricity price increase earlier this year, higher proceeds from the resale of natural gas, which reduce overall fuel costs. Sales and production volume decreases associated with the temporary shutdown of a large industrial customer had a minimal effect on electricity margin in this quarter. Now, I think we can all figure out who that large industrial customer would be. On October 10th, Nova Scotia Power requested an average 7.5 increase in electrical rates for the coming year to recover higher projected fuel costs and previously deferred and approved expenses. Hearings are scheduled to begin January 22nd. So, Mr. Speaker, October 10th is when Nova Scotia Power made its request to go before the Utility and Review Board, and the hearing will be January 22nd. So November, December, January, so slightly over 3 months. The piece of legislation we're talking about this evening, or today, Bill number 20, actually states that the utility may not be granted a general rate increase to take effect less than 12 months following the effective date of the last preceding general rate increase. Mr. Speaker, this is something I think the government may want to look at, because what it's saying is there's nothing to stop Nova Scotia Power from starting the process less than 12 months previous. It only means they can't be granted the rate increase in relation to a previous one within 12 months. And I think this is something the government may want to look at, because it would seem to be even more fair if they couldn't even apply or start that process within a 12-month period. So actually the process will start certainly within a 9-month period or 8 months, and the decision can be made after the 12-month period. So, Mr. Speaker, I have a few problems. Not that the bill. A few problems with the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I'm glad I clarified that. The legislation does something that I think the public out there hearing this is probably thinking, hooray! The government has taken the bull by the horns, and they're finally going to do something with Nova Scotia Power. But it's really difficult to see how serious the impact of this legislation will be for Nova Scotia Power. It's certainly probably the biggest impacts would be if they apply for a particular rate and they don't get it, what's the difference between the rate that they apply for and the rate that the Utility and Review Board gives them? I think if I was Nova Scotia Power, I'd be trying to pad that number as much as I could on the off chance that we don't get what we want, but we'll come close to what we need, and therefore, you know, the bottom line for our shareholders won't be terrible, because we know the bottom line for the company is not terrible. I mean, this is a company that has been making money for sure, so it's a question, I think, in particular, of what they pay out in dividends to their shareholders is really at the crux of the matter. And considering that very few of their shareholders are Nova Scotians, it's pretty hard to have a whole lot of concern for Nova Scotians in this regard. Now, I'm one of those people who lives in rural Nova Scotia. Grew up in, you know, I guess probably in the 50s or I guess early 60s when I was a kid. You know, I lived in an environment where in the spring of the year, if you could get your car through the road, that was an event. More than likely, you were going to be stuck. And I can actually remember reaching out of our car and touching the alder bushes along the roadway. That's just how narrow the road was, or how close to the ditch, if there was one, that we were. And but it was certainly common enough to be stuck on the Renfrew Road. But I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, we didn't lose our power very often. While I grew up in what might be referred to as the backwoods of Nova Scotia, we had good power service. We had good electricity delivery, and where I lived in outside of Enfield. And I had a constituent of mine who lives in the Horn Settlement, called me after the heavy snowstorm we had in November, and he was from North York, I think, in Toronto, around Toronto area, had been there for some years, moved into the Horn Settlement where he thought he moved into the woods, and he said, and this was a man who had two specialties in engineering. He referred to it as double engineering, but he actually was an expert in actually two engineering areas. And I'm not sure if they were mechanical and electrical or what, but anyway, he was no slouch, you know, when it came to talking about this. And the reason he called me was in response to the towers that had come down, Nova Scotia Power's towers that came down, I think, in Dartmouth area. And he said there's absolutely no reason that those towers should come down if that infrastructure is properly maintained or gets to the point where it has to be replaced, that it's replaced. And he said, when I came to Horn Settlement from North York, he said, I commented to my wife what good delivery of power we had in Horn Settlement. He said it was better than North York. He said you could count on losing the power outside of Toronto for an hour a day, quite often. But he said we had really good power delivery in Horn Settlement. He said we don't anymore. He said the amount of power outages that they had experienced was certainly noticeable by him and noticeable by the rest of us, and that's with all we know of improved technology and better equipment and all that. And I have to say I agree, because I have some memory of the service we got when I was a kid. And I have to say that I worry about the infrastructure of Nova Scotia Power. I know that they had an independent assessment of their infrastructure. Whoever did that assessment indicated that their infrastructure was in good shape. Well, I want to tell you, now, I'm not a meteorologist, but I didn't think the snowstorm, that heavy wet snow that brought down those towers, was all that odd for Nova Scotia, a place that has a fairly high moisture content sometime when you get a snowfall. but people acted like it was extraordinary. But I'm not sure that I agree. But I worry, and I've had this worry, I guess, ever since Hurricane Juan, is at some point we are going to have an event that is going to impact Nova Scotia Power's infrastructure in a way that it's going to be very serious, and we're going to be without power for some time, and I mean sometime more than a week, like maybe more than a month. But if we have an ice storm, like they did in Quebec, then we could be in very serious shape for two reasons. One is it would happen in the winter, and the other one is it's pretty hard to deliver power from another source when the infrastructure's gone. The transmission lines are down. And I think one of the issues I've tried to raise with ministers, I think the former Minister of Community Services actually, and certainly the minister involved with emergency measures, is the need to ensure that we have backup generation. Now I think seniors complexes have generators, but they will not run the complex. They'll keep the hall light on and so on, but you can find the door, but you can't run the stove in your apartment. You can't keep the building heated. And if we have an emergency, it's going to be widespread. In other words, there'll be lots of communities, places where you would think you want to take the elderly or anyone to a